Hi, in this lecture you will learn how to use cursors with the PL/SQL loop types. If you remember, in our loop examples, we iterated for specific times and executed a select query for all the iterations. With cursors, we don't have to do that. Since we have a bunch of rows in our memory, we can easily loop through that rows and do our job. We can use cursors with all loop types and we will see all of them now. We will start from the most basic one and go further. So let's start with the easiest loop. Now, we will declare our cursor and cursor record variable. Cursor c_amps is select all the columns from employees, where department ID is equal to 30. vamps is camps percent row type and our begin keyword. Now we will open our cursor. Open c_amps. Now let's loop with our cursor. I simply write loop and now we will fetch c_amps into v_amps. Now let's print that out. dbms output dot put line vamps dot, let me copy that, and employee ID and concatenation with a space vamps dot first name and concatenate that with new space and vamps dot last name. Now let's close the cursor. Close c_amps and our end keyword. But before that, we need to close our loop and loop. Great, just like the old loop usage. The only thing that we do in here is we fetched our cursor inside of our loop. With this way, we fetch the next values one by one without writing fetches for all the rows. It made our code shorter by fetching all the rows in one step. Great, but we have one problem in here. Let's run the code and see the mistake. We have mistyped here, last name. Let's clear up and see the actual error. As we can see, it printed Karen for all the times. Or is it like that? Actually not. Let's scroll up to our script output and see the error. We see that we have a buffer overflow exception. That means we tried to output too many values, so it exceeds the maximum buffer size of the DBMS output package. It passed 1 million bytes. Let's check how many rows do we have in our cursor. But we have 6 rows. This cannot be more than 1 million bytes. Let's turn to the script output. And now let's scroll down. There is another issue. Karen is the only one row in our result set, but it printed Karen for all the times. That means we have an infinite loop in here, because it fetched the last row for all the iterations since there is no next row. Now, how will we handle that? We cannot say that exit the loop when you read 6 rows, because if a new row is inserted into our table, this code will not work. For this problem, cursors have a function to handle that. It is not found function. We need to say that exit when a new row is not found. Let me show you. Exit when c_amps percent not found. We simply write exit when and our cursor name and percent not found. But we need to type that after the fetching but before using. We generally use that right after the fetch operation. Great. Now let's run our code and see if it works. Perfect. Now we see Karen for only one time, and we fetched all the rows of the select query with typing only one fetch. But we are aware of something. We did not open the cursor inside of the loop. If we do that, we will get an error because we try to open the open cursor again. Besides, if you close the cursor inside of the loop, you will attempt to reach a cursor that is closed. So you will have an invalid cursor error. If you type both open and close scripts inside of your loop, this time you will have an infinite loop because you will always fetch the first row, and since it has next rows, the exit will not work ever. Great. Let's do the same example with the while loop. While c_amp not found. And comment this. Now we said that loop while our cursor has no next value. But this is not true. We need to loop as far as we have a next row. So we have another function for that. It is %found. This function returns a Boolean value just like the not found function, and it is true if there is a next row. Now let's do the change and see if it works. Let's run it. As we can see, there is no result. But we said that this should work. So what is the problem? Remember, I said that our %not_found must be after the fetch. But this is also a need for the found function. But in here, we used found function before fetching. So we should fetch at least one before using the found function. Let's do that. Now we need to take the DBMS output before the fetch. Because we fetch first. Great. Now let's run it. As we can see, it worked. But this is not a good usage actually. I don't recommend you to use that. The previous example was better. Besides, we will have much better options to use, and we will see now. This example is only for showing you how to use cursors with while loops. So let's continue. Now, let's turn this example into a for loop. How can we do that? We have some different methods to loop with for loops. I will show you from the worst to the best. The first one is like how we know the for loops. We simply loop with the specified interval of numbers. Let's do it then. And delete here and write for I in 1.6 loop. Since we know that we have 6 rows in our result set, we can write 1.6. It will work. Now let's run it and see if it is correct. As we can see, we have our result set. But this is not a good thing to write a specific interval. I mean, if one more row is added into our table, it won't be printed. So let me show you much more beautiful usage. For in clause. What if I say, I don't need to create a record? Let's delete it. I don't need to open the cursor. And I don't need to fetch. And even I don't need to close it. For in clause does all the things automatically. So how do we do that then? We simply write for I and our cursor name. c_amps. And we change our record names with I. Pretty beautiful, isn't it? Much less typing. No wonder to open or close the cursor. Or no new variables or records to fetch in it. Our cursor is automatically opened, fetched into the automatically created record I. By the way, we can write any name instead of I. We simply write for, then write a name for the cursor variable, then in keyword, then our cursor name and our loop keyword. So easy. Now let's see if it works. As we can see, pretty beautiful. What if I say there is one more beautiful usage of for in clause? We can even write our select query inside of our for in statement. Let's see that. Now let me copy our select statement first. Now I can delete declare keyword and my cursor. I don't need them. Now I will simply paste my select statement inside of parentheses into the place of my cursor name. The rest is the same. Did you notice? I have declared no records, no variables, no opens, fetches, or closing. I just write my select statement inside of the for in clause. This is the most beautiful one. Now let's run and see if it works. As we can see, it worked perfect. But sometimes we may want to use the previous example because sometimes you may want to use a cursor for more than one time. If you will use the same query for more than one times, I recommend you to create a cursor and then use it in all for in clauses. But if you will use that select query for only one time, as we did in here, I recommend you to type it inside of the for in clause. Alright, we have learned all the uses of loops with cursors. You can use any usage depending on your needs. So this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next one.